The afternoon light fell gently over Venice, casting molten gold across the lagoon where gondolas drifted like memories half forgotten. Bells from distant churches chimed in perfect melancholy, echoing across the still water. From the steps of San Giorgio Maggiore, the view stretched endlessly. Cobalt sky, pale domes, and the shimmering silence of history. But inside the cathedral, time stood still. Candles flickered beneath soaring arches, their flames trembling like breath held too long. The air was thick with incense and expectation. Every corner of the sacred space washed in opulence. Marble floors so polished they mirrored heaven, and stained glass windows that painted fractured rainbows across silk gowns and sculpted faces. And down the center aisle she walked. Elena Marchetti. Each step she took echoed softly, a sound swallowed by the ancient stone. Her wedding dress clung to her like a second skin, fluid silk and intricate lace that hugged her body not with warmth but with the weight of surrender. The train flowed behind her like a sigh that never ended, brushing across the marble like a ghost seeking an escape. She kept her gaze forward, but she felt every stare. Dozens of eyes, sharp, silent, dressed in couture and adorned with diamonds, watched her like a prized sculpture unveiled at auction. They weren't here for love, they were here for legacy. Everyone knew this wasn't a wedding, it was a deal. Her father, Italy's media titan, had orchestrated it all. Every thread, every flower, every whisper of promise exchanged for silence, for power, for protection. Elena was not a bride, she was an asset, polished and positioned, the cost of preservation. At the altar, he waited. Adrian Volkov. Even his name carried weight, like stone dragged across glass. He stood motionless, dressed in black tailored so perfectly it looked sculpted onto his tall, rigid frame. His presence filled the cathedral not with warmth, but gravity. Hair dark, skin sun-kissed from summers spent above the world, and eyes, cold and endless, that never once met hers. He didn't look at her, not when she entered, not even as she stood beside him, barely a breath away. Adrian Volkov was not a man marrying a woman. He was a kingdom acquiring land. The priest began. His voice, solemn and distant, floated above the silence. Adrian Volkov, do you take Elena Marchetti to be your lawful wedded wife? There was a pause. Not a hesitation, but something heavier. A moment so silent it roared. Elena stood still, pulse hammering in her throat. She waited, not for his answer, but for a miracle that wouldn't come. A twitch, a flinch, a breath. But Adrian's voice came like stone striking steel. Yes. The word rang final, unmoved, stripped of meaning. A judge, not a groom. Then it was her turn. Elena's lungs burned with words she could never say. Her heart screamed beneath the silk, but when she opened her mouth, what escaped was not defiance. It was obedience. Yes. The platinum ring slid cold onto her finger. Perfect, impersonal. A seal, a lock. You may now kiss the bride, the priest intoned. Adrian turned, his gaze struck like frost. Still no warmth, still no recognition. He leaned forward, too slowly. His lips brushed her forehead, no more than a breath. Not affection, not even acknowledgement. Just a performance. Then he stepped back. From her, from the moment. And Elena stood frozen, inside a cathedral built for worship, dressed like a dream, living a sentence. The applause didn't echo, it vanished. A smattering of claps, restrained and obligatory, faded beneath the high arches like dust settling after a storm. Elena didn't hear it, not really. She was still standing where the kiss had failed to land, still locked inside the hollow space between performance and truth. Her fingers trembled as she lowered the bouquet. Around her, the world moved in soft, choreographed waves. Ushers guiding guests, murmurs swirling like perfume. But Elena drifted through it untouched, as if her body obeyed while her spirit trailed behind in a silence only she could hear. Outside, twilight had settled over Venice like a silk veil. The last remnants of daylight clung to the edges of buildings, turning terracotta walls to burnished gold. Gondolas rocked gently along the canal, casting long shadows that slipped across water darkening by the breath. The bells of San Giorgio chimed once more, not triumphant this time, but slow, aching, like a farewell. A wooden speedboat waited at the edge of the dock, lacquered and elegant, its dark surface glinting under lantern light. It looked like it belonged to another time, another story, one where love had a place. Adrian walked ahead, never glancing back. Elena followed. She stepped onto the boat without hesitation, though everything inside her was screaming to pause, to turn, to undo. But the world had already shifted. The veil of ceremony had lifted, revealing not a marriage, but a sentence. He took the wheel wordlessly, and the boat glided forward, slipping into the Grand Canal as if carried by the night itself. Venice blurred past, bridges arching like unanswered prayers, light flickering behind shuttered windows where warmth lived in other lives. The wind tugged at her veil until, with a flicker of rebellion, she let it go. It caught the breeze and danced for a moment, free, untethered, before vanishing into the dark. Adrian sat just a breath away, yet the distance between them was vast. He stared forward, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting with mechanical stillness on his thigh. His profile remained unreadable, sharp, beautiful, indifferent. Not once did he look at her. Elena didn't speak. Words would have cracked the silence, and the silence, though cold, was safer than whatever lay beneath. The boat curved toward the island of Giudecca, where the villa awaited. An ancient estate veiled in ivy and moonlight, its stone facade lit by warm lamps glowing like old secrets. It rose from the water like a memory built to last, majestic, private, unfeeling. They disembarked in silence. Inside, the halls were gilded in gold and shadow. Chandeliers shimmered above, painting the polished marble in light too precise to feel alive. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something older, like pages from a sealed history. Adrian led, Elena followed. Each step echoed. At the end of the corridor, beneath an arched doorway carved with roses, he stopped. Still facing away, he spoke with the same coolness that had followed her since the altar. "Your room is the last on the right. No affection, no bitterness, only finality." And when he walked away without looking back, Elena didn't call out to him. Because somewhere deep inside, she knew. This was not the beginning of a life. It was the continuation of a silence too heavy to escape. The room was breathtaking, and yet it made her feel impossibly small. Persian rugs softened the marble beneath her feet, and golden drapes framed arched windows that overlooked the quiet shimmer of the lagoon. The bed, dressed in white silk and untouched perfection, stood like a throne. Too grand, too cold, too ready to swallow her whole. Elena stood at its edge, unmoving. She still hadn't unzipped her gown. The weight of it had become a second skin, heavy, suffocating, stitched with promises that had never belonged to her. Her hands shook as she reached for the zipper. The sound of fabric loosening broke the silence like a breath released after hours of holding it in. The gown fell to the floor in a pool of lace and memory, and she stepped away from it as though shedding not just a dress, but the version of herself that had walked into this arrangement. In a thin nightdress that clung to her skin like water, she climbed onto the bed and pulled the sheets around her like a fragile shield. But the silence didn't soften. It pressed harder. Then, footsteps. Not rushed, not loud, just steady, measured. Her breath caught before the door even creaked open. Adrian stood in the frame, his silhouette backlit by the corridor's golden light. The jacket was gone, his tie undone. The first few buttons of his shirt hung loose, revealing a line of sun-bronzed skin and the shadow of muscle beneath. But it was his eyes that froze her. They weren't cold now, not exactly. They burned, with what she couldn't tell. Not fury, not desire, something more dangerous, something nameless. He stepped inside, quietly. The door clicked shut behind him and the room shrank. Elena didn't move. Her fingers clutched the sheet tighter, heart thudding hard enough to drown thought. Adrian stopped at the edge of the bed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty, it was full, of tension, of questions, of truths too sharp to voice. "You should be asleep," he said at last, voice low and rough, like gravel under velvet. Elena swallowed. "You should too." Another silence, but this one crackled. Then, his mouth twitched. Not a smile, not really, more like a shift, like the shadow of something darker slipping through the cracks of who he was. "You're scared," he said, not unkindly, not gently either, just truthfully. "That intrigues me." She wanted to deny it, wanted to say she wasn't afraid of him. But that would have been a lie. She was afraid. Of the silence, of the contract, of what it meant to belong to someone she didn't know. Of what it meant that, despite it all, some part of her didn't want him to leave. He leaned in, slowly, until his presence consumed her senses. "You should hate this," he murmured. "You should hate me." Elena's lips parted, but no words came. Adrian didn't touch her. Not yet. But the air between them shifted, tensed. Then he whispered it, so quiet it barely reached her ears. "I never wanted this marriage." She blinked. She knew. Of course she did. But hearing it now, spoken aloud in the stillness between them, made it feel heavier, more real. She found her voice, small but steady. "I know." His gaze sharpened, but he didn't move away. Instead, he said, "But now I want you, not because I'm supposed to, not because they arranged it, but because I can't stop." And something inside her cracked. A soundless break. A shiver not of fear, but recognition. Morning came slowly. A pale, golden hush spilled across the silk sheets, like light exhaled from the sky. It crept through the sheer curtains, brushed over the marble floors and warmed the corners of the room that had felt so unbearably cold the night before. Elena stirred. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The bed beneath her was too soft, the silence too calm, her body too still. But then she turned and remembered everything. Not just the place, not just the contract, but the way the air had changed when Adrian whispered what he did. "But now I want you." Those words still echoed, wrapped in the quiet like a secret pressed between her ribs. Adrian lay beside her. He wasn't statuesque anymore. Not unreadable. In sleep, his face looked entirely different. Unguarded, less polished, as if the weight he carried had slipped from his shoulders in the dark. The morning light softened him, brushing gold along his cheekbones and revealing the shadow of stubble across his jaw. He looked human, and that, somehow, unsettled her more than all his distance had. Elena stayed still, just watching. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Regret, maybe? Or proof that the night before had meant something to him, that she wasn't the only one who had felt the shift. Then he moved. Not much, just enough. His arm slid across the sheets in sleep, fingers instinctively finding the curve of her waist, resting there without thought. As if, even unconscious, he knew she was meant to be there. Her breath hitched. The touch wasn't possessive, it wasn't careful either. It was something far more disarming, natural, intimate, unpracticed. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself stay. Let the moment stretch across the silence like a fragile bridge. There were no vows between them, no promises. But in that quiet gesture, there was something she hadn't expected to find. Belonging. Adrian stirred again, eyes fluttering open slowly, and when they met hers, finally, fully, it wasn't the cold distance that greeted her. It was just him. No mask, no control, just a man waking up next to the woman he had chosen, whether he wanted to or not. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice rough with sleep. It wasn't much, but it wasn't hollow either. It sounded real. Elena didn't answer right away. A quiet smile tugged at the corner of her lips, barely there. Not because she wanted to pretend, but because, for the first time, she didn't need to. They didn't touch again. They didn't speak more. But something in the space between them had shifted. The silence no longer pressed against her chest, like it wanted to break her. It simply existed. And in that stillness, Elena realized she wasn't afraid. Not of him. Not anymore. The warmth that filtered into the bedroom grew brighter as the sun climbed, casting lace-like patterns across the floor. Elena lay still for a while, her back to Adrian now, feeling the weight of his quiet breath rising and falling behind her. She wasn't sure when the tension in her shoulders had faded. Only that it had. Not entirely, but enough. But even as the light poured in, she lingered, caught between the weight of last night and the unknown that waited beyond the doorway. There was no clarity yet, just less confusion. And sometimes that was enough to move. Eventually she rose. Her bare feet touched the cool marble as she crossed to the wardrobe, where a pale ivory silk dress had been laid out. Simple, elegant. Last night, it would have felt like another costume. Something chosen for her, not by her. But now, it meant something else. Not freedom, perhaps, but choice. Outside, the villa had changed, if only in light. The sun was breaking through the olive trees, spilling golden warmth over the garden paths and stone walls. The shadows were softer now. The silence no longer felt watchful, just still. She stepped into the garden. There, beneath a canopy of trees, Adrian sat at a white stone table. The morning light threaded through his hair, catching on the lighter strands, turning them almost honey gold. In front of him, a quiet breakfast had been laid out: soft boiled eggs, toasted bread, orange marmalade, black coffee. Everything perfectly arranged, intentionally distant, yet waiting. He looked up. Their eyes met. He didn't speak right away, neither did she. There was no awkwardness in the silence, only the echo of everything they hadn't yet said. Then, slowly, he gestured toward the empty seat across from him. Elena sat. The clink of silverware filled the air, subtle against the gentle rustle of olive leaves. Neither of them rushed to speak, as if words needed permission in this new space between them. And strangely, it didn't feel wrong. Adrian poured her coffee. The motion was fluid, practiced, but there was something else in it, something unspoken, like a man who didn't quite know what to do with the softness of another presence at his table. "I don't know how to begin," he said at last, not looking at her. His voice was lower in the morning, rough, slightly hesitant. "I'm not good at soft things." Elena looked at him, not at the man from last night, not the cold, silent figure who had once refused to meet her eyes, but this version, the one pouring her coffee with fingers just barely tense. "I don't need soft," she said quietly. "I just need honest." He met her gaze fully this time. There was no armor in his eyes now, no calculation, just a man sitting across from a woman he didn't know how to reach, but wanted to. "I never thought I'd care about anything beyond control," he admitted. "But last night, you made me question that." Her heart skipped, not wildly, just once. Enough to notice. She didn't rush to reply. Instead, she looked down at her hands, then back at him, voice steady. "Then show me who you really are." Adrian didn't answer with words. He nodded slowly, and in that quiet motion, something shifted. A beginning neither of them had expected. But maybe, just maybe, one they would choose. Later, long after the plates had been cleared and the sun rose higher into its golden throne, Elena wandered the villa alone. Her fingers brushed the rough stone of the archways, trailed along the iron banister of the staircase, paused at the edges of tall windows that overlooked the sea. The silence was still there, but it no longer carried the weight of absence. It felt contemplative, open. She found herself standing in the same hallway where he'd left her the night before, that single sentence echoing like a blade. "Your room is the last on the right." But today, it no longer rang with finality. It was just a fact. One that might change. She didn't know when it had shifted, when the fear had dulled, when the air between them stopped pressing like glass. Maybe it was when his fingers found her waist in sleep. Maybe it was when he said her name without saying it at all. Or maybe it was just now, in this soft, unexpected quiet. She wasn't sure what would come next. But she knew one thing: she was no longer alone in this house, and neither was he. In the stillness, something had taken root. Not love, not yet. But something alive, something real, a thread, fragile and thin, stretching between two people who had once been strangers, and were no longer pretending to be. And for now, that was enough. If they kept walking toward each other like this, quietly, uncertainly, but willingly, something beautiful could grow in the space where silence once lived. A final thought surfaced in her mind, unspoken but steady. like a vow only she could hear. We were never meant to be a love story, but maybe we can choose to become one.